It was 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and I was hiding from my own son in the boiler room of the elementary school where I worked. He was holding a golden trophy, and his eyes were shining with a pride I hadn't felt for myself in over a year. It was in that moment, surrounded by the hum of old machinery, that I finally had to face the man I had become. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Granny's Couch. My name is Joe, and it's a privilege to be able to share a piece of my story with you today. Today, I'm going to tell you what happened in that boiler room and how it changed my life. This is a story about losing a dream you've worked for your entire life and the shame that comes with it. But more than that, it's a story about discovering that your true worth has nothing to do with the title on your paycheck. But before I can take you into that boiler room, with the smell of oil and dust thick in the air, you have to understand the man I was before I ever wore a janitor's uniform. You have to know what was lost before you can understand what was found. My world, back then, wasn't made of concrete and steel pipes. It was made of paper. Vellum, to be exact. The sheets were wide and cool to the touch, and they smelled faintly of pine and possibility. My sanctuary was a drafting table, tilted at the perfect angle under a bright lamp in a small corner of our even smaller house. Late at night, long after the kids were asleep and the house had settled into a quiet rhythm of soft breathing, that was my time. The only sounds were the scratch of my pencil and the whisper of the T-square gliding across the paper. I was 28 years old, and I was an architect. That word, architect, it wasn't just a job title, it was my whole identity. It was the answer to a question my own father, a man who broke his back in a foundry for 40 years, never got to ask. The question of what he could have been. For him, life was about survival. For me, it was supposed to be about creation. My hands, I believed, were meant for shaping skylines. They were precise instruments, trained to turn abstract ideas into tangible structures where people would live and learn and build their own lives. The pride I felt, it was immense. I'd drive Maria and the kids past the new library on the west side of town, and I'd slow the car down, even though it drove everyone crazy. "See that?" I'd say, pointing to the high, arching windows that flooded the reading room with morning light. David, my oldest, would press his face against the glass, his eyes wide. He understood, I think, even at 6 years old. He saw the magic in it, taking something invisible, a dream, and making it real enough to touch. That was the life I was building, one blueprint at a time. And the foundation of it all was Maria. She was as practical as I was idealistic. Where I saw soaring glass and elegant lines, she saw mortgage payments and grocery bills. She was the one who would find me at my drafting table at 2 in the morning, a ghost in her nightgown, and place a warm mug of coffee beside my hand without a word. She never had to say, "Joe, you're working too hard." She also never had to say, "Joe, I'm scared." I could see it in her eyes sometimes, but I could also see the belief. It was her quiet faith in me that made my own ambition feel not just possible, but necessary. We had just bought our first home, a little 2-bedroom bungalow on a street lined with maple trees that turned fiery red in the fall. It was almost foolish financially. With 3 children, David, then little Sarah, and baby Michael, we were already bursting at the seams, and Maria was pregnant with our 4th. The house was a promise. It was an investment in a future that from my drafting table seemed as solid and certain as a steel girder.
I remember the day we got the keys. The place smelled of old paint and decades of other people's dinners. The floors creaked and one of the windows in the kitchen wouldn't close all the way. We stood in the empty living room, the kids' voices echoing off the bare walls, and Maria leaned her head against my shoulder. "It's too small, Joe," she whispered, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "It's perfect," I said, and I meant it, because it was ours. It was the first tangible piece of the life I had designed for us. That house, that dream, it wasn't just for me, it was for them. I'd grown up hearing the word no. No, we can't afford that. No, there's no time for that. No, that's for other people. My life's mission was to build a world for my children where the answer would be yes. Yes to music lessons if they wanted them. Yes to a family vacation to see the ocean. And the biggest yes of all, yes to college, to any future they could imagine for themselves, without the crushing weight of debt that had haunted me. Every late night I spent at that table, every weekend I gave up to meet a deadline, was a deposit into that bank of yes. The lines I drew weren't just for buildings. They were lines of defense against the hardships I knew. They were the walls of a fortress of security I was trying to build around my family. And I defined myself by that role. At neighborhood barbecues, when people asked what I did, I loved the way the words felt in my mouth. I'm an architect. It was a shield. It told people who I was. I was a professional, a creator, a man with a plan. It separated me from the world of my father, the world of clocking in and clocking out, of coming home too tired to do anything but sit in a chair and stare at the wall. I wasn't just Joe. I was Joe the Architect. That title was my armor, and I wore it with such confidence. I truly thought it was unbreakable. I believed with all my heart that the foundation of the life I was building was sound, and that nothing in the world could ever shake it. And like any man filled with that much pride, completely certain in his own strength, I was blind to the hairline cracks already forming in that foundation. I thought my armor was unbreakable. I learned, very quickly, that it was made of glass. It all came apart on a Wednesday. It was a perfectly ordinary day, which is how the worst moments of your life always begin. I remember kissing Maria goodbye that morning. Her belly was big and round, and she'd reached that point in the pregnancy where everything was an effort. She gave me that tired, beautiful smile of hers, and I felt that familiar surge of purpose. This is why I work so hard. For her. For them. But the moment I walked into the office, the air was wrong. It was thick with a silence I had never heard before. Normally, the place was a symphony of creation, phones ringing, pencils scratching, the low hum of conversation as ideas were debated and refined. That morning, there was nothing, just the sound of my own footsteps on the hardwood floor. People were at their desks, but they were just staring at their useless drafting tables as if they were tombstones. Then Mr. Abernathy's door opened. He was a good man, with kind eyes and hands that were always smudged with graphite. He just looked at me and nodded, a silent summons. I walked into his office, and I remember the way the light from the window caught the dust motes dancing in the air, 1,000 tiny, glittering worlds that had no idea ours was about to end. His face was the color of wet concrete. He didn't waste words. He couldn't. I think the truth was a rock in his own throat. He said, "The bank pulled our funding, Joe. The last 2 developers went under. We're insolvent." He looked down at a stack of papers on his desk, but he wasn't seeing them. Effective immediately, we're all out of a job. The firm is gone. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a physical sensation, a sudden, cold retreat from my skin, leaving me feeling hollow. My hands, the hands that designed homes and libraries, the hands I thought could build a fortress around my family, they just felt numb. Heavy, useless things at the ends of my arms. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the traffic. I don't remember the turns I made. All I saw were the skeletons. On every other corner, a half-built structure stood silent against the sky. A new apartment building with no walls. The frame of a shopping center with no roof. A week ago, I saw them as signs of progress, of my industry thriving. That day, they looked like monuments to a dead dream. My dream. I pulled into our driveway and just sat in the car for a minute, the engine ticking as it cooled.
I could hear the faint sound of the kids laughing in the backyard. I knew I had to go inside. I knew I had to walk through my own front door and face my wife, see her standing there with our future growing inside of her, and tell her that the foundation of our life, the one I promised was so strong, had just cracked. And I'm telling you, that walk from the car to the front door was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. Walking through that door felt like stepping off a cliff. Maria was at the sink, washing vegetables, her back to me. She turned, a smile already on her face, and when she saw me, it faded. She knew. Before I said a single word, she knew. I didn't have to tell her the foundation was cracked. She felt the tremor in the ground beneath her feet. That night, we didn't talk much. We just held each other in the dark. And for the first time, the future wasn't a blueprint. It was a blank, terrifying void. The year that followed was a free fall. At first, there was a strange kind of hope. I told myself it was temporary, a downturn. I was an architect, after all. I had skills. I spent my days at the kitchen table with the newspaper, circling ads, writing letters, making calls. But my industry wasn't just in a downturn. It was gone. The phone never rang. The letters I sent went unanswered. The men I used to work with, good men, were now my competition for the few phantom jobs that would appear and vanish in the same day. The savings vanished faster than water through a sieve. It started with the big things. The second car, the one we barely used, was the first to go. I sold it for half what it was worth, and the cash felt like a handful of sand already slipping through my fingers. Then, one quiet afternoon, while the kids were napping, Maria came to me, and she held out her hand. In her palm were her wedding earrings and a gold locket her grandmother had given her. She didn't cry. Her jaw was set. "It's just metal, Joe," she said, "but I saw what it cost her." Each sacrifice was a piece of our past, sold to buy a few more days of our present. The worst part, the part that ate me out from the inside out, was the shame. It was a physical weight. I'd be in the grocery store and see a former colleague from across the aisle, and I would physically duck behind a display of cereal boxes, my heart pounding until he was gone. The question I dreaded most was, "So, what are you doing now, Joe?" It never meant to be cruel, but it felt like an accusation. It felt like they were asking, "What happened to you? Where is the architect we knew?" And I didn't have an answer. My identity had been so tied to my profession that without it, I felt like no one. A ghost.
Through it all, Maria never once blamed me. She was my anchor. She just got more practical, more creative. She would invent a new soup from a few potatoes, a can of tomatoes, and the bone from a roast we'd had 3 nights before. She'd call it recession stew and serve it with a smile, as if it were a grand new recipe. She learned to mend the kids' clothes so perfectly you could barely see the stitches. She'd sit under the lamp in the living room late at night, her brow furrowed in concentration, fighting to hold our little world together with a needle and thread. But I saw the truth. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her at the kitchen table, the light from over the sink casting long shadows on her face as she stared at a stack of bills, her eyes wide with a worry she never showed me in the daylight. And the mailman, I grew to hate the sound of the mail slot opening. That gentle thud of letters on the floor became a sound of cold dread in my stomach because I knew another final notice was in that stack. After 6 months of nothing, the only job I could find was as a night shift janitor at the local elementary school, my kids' school. I still remember the interview. It wasn't an interview. The principal knew me, knew my situation. He was just kind. He handed me the application and looked away, giving me the dignity of not having to meet his eyes. The first time I put on that gray uniform, I didn't look in the mirror. I couldn't. It felt like I was putting on a costume of my own failure. I worked when the building was empty. a ghost mopping the floors where my own children learned. I'd see their desks, their names written in clumsy crayon on their artwork taped to the walls, and the shame would wash over me again, cold and sharp. I was an invisible presence in their world, cleaning up their messes in the dark. Which brings me back to that night, the night of the awards ceremony. I knew it was happening in the auditorium, just down the hall from where I was scrubbing scuff marks off the floor. I could hear the faint sound of applause, the muffled voice of the principal over the loudspeaker. Each clap felt like a judgment. So I fled. I went to the one place no one would ever look for me, the boiler room. It was warm, and the low, steady hum of the machinery was a comfort. I was hiding from the sound of other parents celebrating their children while I was just the man who cleaned up their popcorn after. I was taking a break, eating a cold sandwich, when I heard the door creak open. And there he was, David, my oldest son, his hair combed and his best shirt on, standing in the doorway holding a golden trophy. He was supposed to be on stage. He was supposed to be celebrating. Instead, he had come to find me. He walked into that dusty, oily room, his face glowing with a mixture of pride and something else, something that broke my heart. He held up the trophy. It was for his science project, first place. And then he said those words, the words that changed everything. His voice was quiet, but it was stronger than the hum of a boiler. "Some kids made fun of your uniform, Dad." He looked right at me, his 8-year-old eyes holding all the injustice in the world. I told them my dad works harder than anyone. He was defending me. He had stood up in front of his friends on his night and defended my honor. And all I had been doing was hiding from it. In that moment, looking at my son, my brave, fierce 8-year-old son, standing in that dusty room holding his golden trophy, something inside me didn't just crack, it shattered. It was my pride, the false pride, the kind that's built on titles and paychecks, the kind that's as fragile as glass. For a solid year, I had been drowning in shame. I was ashamed of the gray uniform, ashamed of the mop in my hand, ashamed of the man I saw in the mirror. I thought I had lost everything of value. But David didn't see a janitor. He didn't see a failure. He looked at me and saw his dad. He saw the man who tucked him in at night, the man who fixed his bicycle chain, the man who got up in the dark every single night and went to work, no matter how tired he was. He saw a man who showed up, who worked, who provided. He didn't care about the title. He cared about the man. The pride in his eyes wasn't just for his trophy, it was for me. And it was a purer, more powerful pride than I ever felt for myself, even when I was designing buildings that touched the sky. And I realized, in that dusty, dimly lit room, with the low hum of the boiler all around us, that I had been confusing my job with my purpose. My job was to be an architect, and when I lost that job, I thought I had lost myself. I thought my story was over. But my purpose was standing right in front of me, holding a science trophy. My purpose was to raise him. My purpose was to be a husband to Maria, a father to my 4 children. This job, this uniform, this mop, they weren't the end of my story. They were just the tools. They were the tools I was using to write the most important chapters of my life. The shame I had been carrying, that heavy, suffocating weight, it didn't just disappear, but it changed. It was transformed into something else. The heat of it forged something new. The lesson became as clear and as solid as a block of granite. Dignity isn't in the title on your business card. Dignity isn't in the size of your paycheck. Dignity is in the work itself. It's in the love that drives you to do it day in and day out. It's in showing up. For the first time in a year, I looked at my son and I wasn't hiding anymore. I was just his dad, and that was more than enough. It was everything. I walked out of that boiler room a different man. I took my son's hand, his small fingers wrapping around mine, and we walked down the empty hallway together, the sound of his new shoes squeaking on the linoleum. We didn't say much. We didn't have to. He had given me my honor back, not by saying I was an architect, but by saying I was his dad. From that night on, everything changed. I mean, the circumstances didn't change. The bills were still there. The uniform was still gray. But I went back to work with a different heart. The shame was gone, and in its place was a quiet, stubborn resolve. I made a decision that night. If I was going to be a janitor, I would be the best janitor that school had ever seen. It started small. I stopped seeing the hallways as a symbol of my failure and started seeing them as my responsibility. I took pride in them. I learned the specific groan of the third-floor radiator and how to silence it with a gentle tap. I learned that Mrs. Davison in second grade always stayed late to prepare her lessons, so I made sure her classroom was the last one I cleaned, so she wouldn't feel rushed. I learned the names, not just the teachers, but the lunch ladies, the groundskeeper, the school secretary. We were a team, all of us, working in our own ways to make a safe place for these kids. I started fixing things without being asked. A loose tile here, a sticky lock there. My hands, the hands I thought were only meant for blueprints, discovered a new kind of satisfaction in making something broken whole again. The school wasn't just a building I cleaned anymore. It became my community. I stopped being the ghost in the hallways and became Mr. Joe. Teachers would leave me notes on their chalkboards. "Thanks for fixing the bookshelf, Mr. Joe," or "The floors have never looked better." And I would smile, a real smile, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the boiler room. I worked that job for 32 years. 32 years. I saw my own 4 children walk those halls, graduate, and move on. I saw them replaced by new waves of kids with different hairstyles and different slang, but with the same boundless energy. I watched the seasons change through those big school windows. I saw principals come and go. I became a fixture, a quiet, steady presence. Work was hard. It was honest, and it was mine. And that janitor's salary? It was never much, but stretched thin with Maria's magic, it performed miracles. That humble paycheck, earned on my hands and knees scrubbing floors, put 4 children through college. Every dollar was a battle, every tuition payment a triumph. I remember signing those checks at our small kitchen table, my hand shaking a little, not from fear, but from the sheer, unbelievable weight of what it represented. It paid for a doctor, our oldest, David, the boy from the boiler room. It paid for a teacher, our fiery daughter, Sarah, who has more patience in her little finger than I have in my whole body. It paid for an engineer, our son Michael, who now designs bridges. And it paid for a small business owner, our youngest, Laura, who was born just a few months after I lost my firm, and who now runs a bakery that fills her own small town with the smell of hope every morning.
We never got the big house I designed in my dreams. We never took those fancy vacations. We stayed in that same little 2-bedroom house long after it was bursting at the seams. But we built something else in that house. We built a home that was rich with something more valuable than money. We built it with character. Our kids grew up watching a man come home tired, but never defeated. They learned that honest work, no matter what it is noble. They learned that what you do for a living is far less important than who you are as a person. They learned that integrity isn't about the suit you wear to work, but about the heart you bring to it. My hands never shaped another skyline. I never built another library or another museum. But I built a life. Maria and I, we built a family. We raised 4 children who are kind and strong and who know the value of hard work. And I am here to tell you, as a man who has seen both sides of it, there is no greater architecture than that.
I'm sharing this with you because I know how easy it is to tie your identity to your career. We live in a world that asks, "What do you do?" before it asks, "Who are you?" And if you find yourself in a season of life where the work you're doing feels small or unseen or not what you dreamed of, I want you to remember that boiler room. I want you to remember that your value is not determined by your business card. It's measured in your integrity, in your kindness, and in the love you give to the people who are counting on you. That is the work that lasts. That is the foundation that will never crack. I'd love to hear from you. Has there ever been a time in your life when you learned a powerful lesson from an unexpected place? Please share your story in the comments below. Thank you for letting me share my heart with you today. Be kind to yourselves and to each other, and I'll see you in the next story.